Okay.
Live 02 coming at you live. Ready.
I think we can just keep that part in. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jenna Ochoa, and I'm back with the Live 02 team for our next episode of talking about using Live 02. So today, our topic is going to be the flu epidemic. So this year is the first year that the entire continental US has been the same color on the CDC's map of the flu activity, which, Mark, I think you have a graphic of that. You can see it week by week. So as you can see, it just keeps getting worse. And I'm sure, like most of you, you keep hearing on the news that this is just the worst year yet. And lots of medications aren't working. The vaccine's not working as well as it has. So today I'm joined, of course, by Tom, who is our previous host, VP and partner of the company, Mark Squibb, whom many of you know, it's a CEO and founder. And we're joined by Rob Parson, who's our director of sales, but also a Live 02 adaptive contrast user. So welcome, guys, and thanks for joining us today. If you wouldn't mind giving just a brief intro to yourself, and I know I just kind of said what you did at the company, but if you'd like to just give a quick intro to our audience. And Mark, we'll go ahead and start with you.
My name is Mark Squibb. I've been working with Live 02 since, I guess, the original invention back in about 2010. I've worked with probably thousands of people and been using it personally for a very long time. And I've had a lot of experiences about how to get over things faster and, how to use it not to get sick in the first place. So my experience is I'm so excited. I'm happy to be here. And I'm looking forward to saying more.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. And Tom, let's go ahead and get your intro, even though I know you were just on here last week, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Tom Butler, and been engaged with finding a better way for a really long time. Live 02 is, of course, one of my favorite ways as a practitioner to help individuals open up and actually have more energy so they can heal more or do more in their life. And it's a wonderful tool in terms of having something at home. The best case scenario is to not get sick at all. But if you do get sick, you don't want to spend a week and a half recovering. You want to know how to recover yourself as quickly as possible and get back to your normal, healthy life.
Good deal. And that's actually why we brought on Rob today. So I know that Rob recently had a bout with the flu. Actually, I don't know if it was this flu season, but Rob has some personal experience with using his system. So that's why we thought we'd bring him in. So Rob, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Yes, my name is Robert Parson. Normally, if anyone's going to call into Live 02 or call into the company or send an email, there's a good chance that you'll be communicating back and forth with myself. And I've also been one of the trainers here at Live 02. So I've traveled, all over the country, trained, hundreds of people on the system. So I've got to have a really good broad perspective on, how it works with different people. And I'm really happy to share some of my experiences with my own personal use of the system and how you've been able to really help out my wife and other people with an immune protocol. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks to all three for joining us today and for providing some education to our audience. So let's go ahead and kick things off. As I mentioned, our entire team, it seems, has had a bout with the flu this year. So starting with Mark, I know that it hit you pretty hard. So Mark, I'll go ahead and kick it to you. Why don't you take us through your recent experience and then walk us through the science behind why oxygen works for treating the flu?
Sure. Well, the flu hit our house on, I guess, just after Christmas. I've got 3 boys, and all 3 of them ended up in bed for somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks. Now, these are not these are country-born, well-fed kids. And when something hits them that hard, it's serious. My wife also got sick. So I had a whole house full of sick kids, and they just couldn't get off the couch for 3 to 4 weeks, which told me that it was pretty serious. On January 2nd, I ended up coming down sick, flu, everything. But unfortunately, unlike them who could sit around on the couch, I had to be on an airplane on Saturday morning. So I had 4 days to recover. And so I went into a panic saying, I cannot travel sick. So that was my queue to go ahead and get with the program. And once I went through that process, I realized that what I did would be of big value to everybody else. Now, interestingly, I came back from the trip and I had a relapse and a second bout, and I was also able to cycle through that in about 3 days. So as I got into this, I'm like, wow, what happened? And I just, after I looking back in the rearview mirror, seeing how sick my family was and how quickly I got well, I knew there had to be something here. So, and when I dug into it, that's where it got interesting. Jenna, do you want me to go ahead and start with the
Yeah, with the slide deck, sure. I think to preface this here, as most of you know, the LiveO2 system was founded on a book called the Oxygen Multi-Step Therapy book, written by Manfred von Arden. And that is the science, that is the basis of our product. So I think what Mark is going to show you here today is how that science relates to what we're talking about, how you can support your immune system with oxygen if you have the flu. So Mark, go ahead and share your deck up if you have it.
So when I got the flu, I started thinking about what was actually going on, and in terms of the physiology, which is really not addressed in any textbooks. So as we get into it, it's not really that complicated. But what I wanted to do was talk about what the flu is. And it's basically an attack, or it's a disease where you lose part of your lungs. And so it directly attacks the respiratory system. And so healing the respiratory system while it's not working is really difficult. So this first slide basically talks about the language I'm using, and I call it the oxygen utilization profile. The red line at the top is when blood goes through the heart and lungs. This is the amount of oxygen that's in the blood that's available to support the rest of the body. And then this bottom line that I'll build out later is basically the amount of oxygen that comes back into the heart and lungs after it's circulated around the body. So the important message in this is the distance between the red line and the purple line is how much oxygen the body was able to use. And believe me, more is better. So now that I've got this laid out, what happens is you go out and you get the flu. And I drew this purple line here that talk about exposure and infection. So you run into a virus particle that goes in your lungs and it starts to attack, or it invades a cell in your lungs. And then once it's inside, it'll turn that cell into a virus factory. And this is called an incubation period. It'll go on anywhere between 2 and 7 days, depending on how long it takes your immune system to catch up with what's going on. So the problem here is the longer you're in this phase, the more virus gets manufactured, and the more you get sicker, and the more the people around you get sicker. Okay, now while this is going on, because the virus does really well by not being detected, you experience a slight loss in oxygenation. You don't feel sick, you just feel like, maybe I'm not off. All right, so this is maybe 5 to 10%, which is you don't really notice. Then what happens is you come down sick. The trigger for that is your immune system has recognized you've got an invader, and it's like, uh-oh, we got to get on with this. So what happens there is the immune system will go into the lungs and it will attack all of your own lung cells that have become these virus factories. And you usually see this as the decrease in oxygen going out of the lungs. Now, there are two things that really happen. The research we've seen so far, and it's consistent with how you feel when you come down sick, man, you go down hard and you just feel terrible. But what's happening is your body is actually destroying lung tissue, and when it destroys that lung tissue, it makes a mess. And we experience that mess as mucus or phlegm. So the problem there is all that phlegm lives as a thin film, and it actually blocks oxygen from going from the air in your lungs into your bloodstream. So, and the fact that your body is actually killing off lung cells means that your functional oxygenation reduces to about 50% of normal, which is why you feel so tired. And this loss of oxygenation, I mean, it's a fractional suffocation event. So it's really not good. So at the same time, you get a fever, your immune system is attacking your cells, you get debris as mucus. And the other thing that happens is because you've lost the ability to breathe properly, your pH in your body, every system goes out. And so the creation of the soreness and stuff is actually these pH swings where your cells absorb sodium and hydrogen, and so your pH just goes weird. And because you don't have the oxygen, you're super tired. So, then the other problem is that as you come sick, now becoming sick happens really quick, like in hours, like you say, wow, I don't feel right. And then an hour later, you're like, dude, life sucks. So the point here is that once you lose this respiratory capacity, your immune system, which is a system in the body that's trying to do work, really shuts down. So it's trying to do a job, but at the same time, it doesn't have the ability to produce energy. So it really, the bottom line here is your immune system gets stuck at, let's call it 50% power with a big job to do, which is one of the reasons why the organic recovery from the flu is so slow. The system that you need to breathe is damaged while it's trying to do your healing. So an organic recovery from a flu or even any respiratory reaction or respiratory infection takes a long time because the energy and the resources you need to recover are offline because the disease has attacked those resources. So when you look at recovery, it's 2 to 4 weeks, because your body has to repair the lung tissue, you got to restore oxygenation. And, as you start to recover, then your immune system gets stronger until you finally recover. So I call this the organic recovery timeline. So now when we talk about LiveO2, like my favorite is, I'll come back from a trip. I assume the guy next to me on the plane had a flu. And so what I will usually try to do, not always, but try to get it done, is I will try to get on LiveO2 as soon as I get back in. So if I can catch the infection while it's incubating, then get my immune system alert fast, then I will usually either not get sick at all or maybe just have a little blip. Okay, but the sooner you get on it, the better. And so if you can stop the flu or get your immune system active, you'll end up losing less respiratory capacity, you'll end up with less symptoms, and you won't end up with the mucus barrier and all the other things that that make you miserable. So the next phase is what happened on this last 2 times, which is I missed hitting it during the incubation period. I actually went down, fever of 102, in bed, just felt terrible. But I realized that what was going on, so I got myself out of bed and I got in the sauna and on LiveO2. And what was amazing was that after I got off it the first time, I bounced back literally in hours. 2 hours, 1 hour. As soon as I got off the system, I felt better. And this is the picture. So what I think happened was, even though I didn't start LiveO2 during this initial phase, I was able to override or overwhelm the loss of oxygenation, push through the mucus, and get my immune system and my oxygen levels so that I was nowhere near as miserable. Mind you, I was still sick. I knew that my immune system was active. I just was on my feet, able to work, and missed out on a lot of the miserable. So what I believe happened there is that I was able to use the LiveO2 to restore my oxygenation, which reduced the pH imbalances, discomfort, body aches and pains. I didn't get the fatigue. My immune system kept working, and I just got better so much faster, and I missed out on a lot of the misery. Now, because I realized that if I didn't work out, I skipped it, I would go back down. So I used these little things, like I used it every day just to keep getting better. So my summary here was, I think my flu experience was, I'll call it 3 days. I'm having a little issue with my thing here, but this is 3 days. I was really only miserable for 2 days, and then the third day was kind of like a half day down. I was able to get back to my desk and back to work. I was sick over the weekend. So that's, I think, my personal experience. As I back out, I said, well, if I'm somebody watching this presentation, I'm going to want to say, well, what protocol should I do when? And so we've got 3 different protocols that we've laid out. Is if you're trying to support the flu during the first phase, when you're just back, immuno2, which is hyperthermia and whole body flush. If you've gone down, you feel miserable, we developed a technique called FluO2, which is on the website now, as I'll call it an intermediate care protocol. The concept there is we push oxygen into the lungs to increase the immune performance in the lungs while you're sick, to help get your respiratory system working better, as well as the sauna. Obviously, if you can go and do immuno2 while you're chilling, it feels really good. And then when you get to the backside, getting back into whole body flush and the more active protocols help you bounce back and just stay well, get well faster. the thing that has me discouraged around conventional care is the only information you find out there is be sure to get that flu shot. I was researching this morning, and the current version, which they call H3N2, is incredibly virulent. But the thing that just knocked me flat was based on data coming out of Australia. They're saying it's only 10% effective. So that's just not really encouraging. What I experienced and what we saw here actually has history behind it. This is a graph out of Manfred von Ardenn's book, where he's telling in graphics the same story we're telling here. So his normal is that he's talking about influenza. His picture here shows roughly a 50% decrease in oxygenation, and then recovery over 8 to 14 days. Really, the recovery boils down to how much oxygenation or respiratory capacity you lose as a result of the infection, and then coming back and getting back on your feet takes a long time. He's got the other thing here, which is using the LiVO2 technique, where you basically fall ill. Same loss in respiratory capacity, but if you get on and you do get yourself reoxygenated, there's an almost instant restoration and oxygenation, and then you basically rehab from the flu in a few hours. And that's exactly what we experienced, at least for myself and my oldest son. So thank you, Jenna.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that information, Mark. I did have one question. So you mentioned, and for people who already use LiVO2, you guys may already be familiar with the use of different supplemental equipment. So Mark, you mentioned using a sauna. Could you walk through just the concept behind that for people who are brand new to LiVO2 or who may not have a system, what that does to your body?
Okay. Yeah, sure. I wish I had a little graphic, but oxygen binds to hemoglobin. Okay, and the binding strength or the force that enables that oxygen to stick to hemoglobin is temperature sensitive. So as the body gets warm, the binding between that oxygen and that hemoglobin decreases, so oxygen will jump off. So if you use heat, the heat actually helps to increase your body temperature, and your heart rate will go up as part of a cooling response. But at the same time, you decrease the binding of the oxygen, so the oxygen will jump off the hemoglobin. So it's a way, the hyperthermia is a way to super oxygenate yourself. Now Manfred von Ardenne developed a technique which what he called it was an immune protocol. And what he found was that by using hyperthermia, that you could actually use the sauna in lieu of an exercise technique. But also, for example, if you got the cold or flu, if you're not feeling well, what happens is you feel chilled and your body's trying to get that fever going. Crawling in the sauna, getting your temperature up, getting some sweat going, drive the detox. At the same time, you're breathing oxygen, helps your body to just like spin up and oxygenate. So, and we've got that on the website as Immuno2, which is a hyperthermia protocol, but it's basically a nice way to oxygenate yourself when may not be feeling so well.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. I just thought it might be good to outline that for people who aren't familiar with that technique. But like Mark said, we have all that information on the website, and I'll be sure to link up to that here in the sidebar too. Cool. So now what I'd like to do is, fresh off all that information from Mark, he shared his personal experience. And as I mentioned, Rob, who is our director of sales, but also an adaptive contrast user. I know a lot of you listening also have an adaptive contrast system. So I'd like to hear how Rob used his system when he was sick, and just share, what you did, any tips or best practices that you have for other people looking to kind of replicate the same type of protocol.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. I'd like to just share a little story of how LiVO2 adaptive contrast has really been a lifesaver in a lot of situations in my house. So I found a really good use for LiVO2 that's been, extremely effective in the red zone, I kind of call it, right when you just feel that sickness starting to come on. And time and time again, I've started, using LiVO2 right in that red zone period, right at the moment where you just feel it in the back of your throat, you feel a little tired, you know that the bug is coming on. And I feel like that is the absolute best time to use a system, because, you know, that's a really critical time, because that's the time when you can either turn a corner and go back to feeling healthy again, or you can go the other direction, which we all have been there. And it's the worst feeling in the world when you're sick and you get down for weeks or days at a time. So, you know, I just feel it's like the critical point. So the story I have is with my wife. You know, she works at a hospital. She's a speech language pathologist. So she's looking in people's throats, looking in their mouths. She's already in a hospital, which is a pretty, you know, there's a lot of germs in that environment because sick people go there. And it's really critical that she remains healthy, because, you know, if she's working with elderly patients most of the time, or people with compromised immune systems, or dealing with infections, things like that. So she can't be sick and she's out of work. You know, it's very difficult to do, and her job is very demanding, working kind of long hours, and it's a very intense setting and an acute medical setting. So, you know, she came home from work one day, you know, not feeling the best. She started feeling a little bit like she's getting sick. You know, she went to bed that night. Next morning she wakes up, she decides she's going to go to work. And she calls me about midday and she's like, Rob, I got to come home. I'm feeling horrible. So she comes home, she's going down really, really fast. You know, she just doesn't feel great. She's not hungry. She's, you know, feeling horrible. And I'm like, you know, man, this looks like you're going to be going down for a while. So what we did is, the first thing I did is I put the pulse oximeter on her finger just to kind of get a baseline of where she was at. And to my surprise, sitting there in our house at rest, she's pushing a heart rate of, you know, over 110, over 115, just sitting still. And I was like, okay, and that's the first really good sign that her immune system is kicking into high gear, and there's something really serious coming on here. So right at that point, from reading the Van Arden's Oxygen Multi-Step Therapy book, reading through what they were doing for, what he was doing for illnesses and immune protocols for people that aren't able to exercise. Because the last thing I know that she would want to do at that point is get on exercise equipment and start moving. She just doesn't want to do anything but go right to bed. So I said, let's do one better than just going to rest, is let's lay you down right here next to the system. I charged up our system, placed the mask on her, laid her down. I put a couple blankets on her as well, because I know from reading the protocols as well, the hypothermia is ideal, but we didn't have a sauna, and, you know, getting the bathtub together and moving the system was a little bit would be a stretch. So we just laid her down on the couch. I brought the system over near her, throw some blankets on her, and just had her rest and breathe oxygen in a rested position. And we put her through a LiveO2 session on oxygen. She gets up, you know, she's like, wow, I feel a little bit better after that session. She goes and lays down, goes to sleep. Next morning, almost completely healed. No more sign of infection, no more sign of flu or cold. She's feeling great, and even good enough to go to work in the next morning. And that's where you've been coming home early the day before. And it just kind of blew me away. I was like, man, that's such a powerful tool to have in our house. You know, all the discomfort and time and that you have to deal with getting sick. And if we have this tool in our home, so now that we have that and we've kind of figured this out, I've done the same exact thing. I've you know, had a day where I'm not feeling the best. But I think the key to it for me is that we have to hit it right at the first sign of getting sick. Right when you feel a little off, you just go in there, do a LiveO2 protocol, and just laying at rest has been a really, really good tool for our family and keeping everyone healthy and operational. So yeah, that's my little story, and I think it's just a really powerful tool that a lot of our users, and it's, you know, that's why we're doing a protocol like this. A lot of people don't know that you can use LiveO2 in this way, and I think this is an excellent time of year and an excellent podcast for us to be sharing, because it's such a powerful tool that they have at their fingertips, and they just need to know how to use it.
Mm-hmm. I also think you shared a really great tip there, Rob, about using the blanket. I think that's really cool because, as you said, a lot of people don't have these other supplemental systems like a sauna. I mean, that's a pretty pretty big piece of equipment, and a lot of people don't have it. So it's neat to hear that you could use a blanket to kind of, I guess, mirror or mimic that same effect, but just with something that you have, around the house. So that's really cool. Okay, well, yeah,
I think
go
one
ahead,
of the
Mark.
other things I'd like to add is just the whole idea about being able to use your own immunological challenge as a source of stimulation. I mean, that's wonderful. Just realizing that when her heart rate is at 15, those are the precise circumstances where her respiratory system is fired up. So that's really wonderful, and just leveraging that. So good job, Rob.
Yeah, I think that's really
Yeah,
good.
thanks.
And what I would like to do now is, so I know that Mark kind of prefaced all this with the science behind why it worked for him, and kind of took us through those graphs and images. But what I'd like to do now is kind of kick it to Tom. And Tom, if you wouldn't mind just sort of, I guess, analyzing Rob's situation and kind of explaining to folks why his wife had the response that she did.
Absolutely. So what, I'll call this the East meets West moment. One of the most frustrating things that we experience in our medical knowledge is we're a little bit unaware of actually how intelligent the body is. So we look for research to confirm that, but it's elusive, so we kind of have some gaping holes in our theory of modern medicine of like, why isn't oxygen, prescribed or used for people to, get over a cold? And it's exactly what Manfred Van Arden started talking about initially with his protocols. And he was looking at the long term. He would take a history from someone and trace it back to 15, 20 years ago and say, this is the injury to your respiratory system that now has resulted in your current disease state. And what we've been talking about today is a much shorter process, but it's still an injury to that respiratory system. And, the East meets West moment is, basically where Chinese medicine has a great way to explain this in the defensive energy of the body. Our lung is actually responsible for generating that. And it's called Wei Qi. And basically, if we have a healthy, breath pattern and oxygenation in a warm body temperature, we kind of walk around with, 2 or 3 inches of defense that emanates from our skin. And the pathogen has to get through that before we can actually get sick. Now, there are things that put dents in that Wei Qi. If we're inactive or we're not oxygenated, or if we're, eating a lot of refined sugars and flours. But the idea is when we first start to get sick, and we feel that ache, and just as Rob saw in his wife, the pulse rate goes up and we start to feel weak. That's your body trying to push back against this pathogen. So the number one thing you can do is look at it, just as Mark mentioned, as an immune response, and help support that immune response. So then, we hear a lot about supporting your body with fluids when you're sick, but really the fluids are just a mechanism for carrying oxygen. So really you want to support your body through an oxygenation protocol to help modulate the immune system and push that defensive energy back out. And if you can do that soon enough, you have about 3 or 4 hours when you first start to feel something where you can actually just kick that pathogen out altogether. Getting a little bit of a sweat is nice. And then, making sure you're warm, making sure you're oxygenated and well hydrated, and putting yourself to bed early, usually you can wake up the next morning without the cold. And that's by far the best scenario, is when your body gets that challenge, it's strong enough to rally and push it out. Now, what we're seeing with this season is there's a particularly strong pathogen out there. And a lot of people who normally maybe don't get this cold are getting it just because it is challenging enough. And once you've got it, you still have to do the same type of things in terms of supporting your body. But you don't do that through exercise. You do that through the protocol that Mark has described, where you're simply bumping up your oxygen level to help your body from completely crashing. Think of it as a way to support your physiology in a new way. And the other side of this that Manford shows in his graphs is when we've been completely derailed and we've gone sideways, we're now left in a place where our physiology and our respiratory system has been injured. And we have to think the same way of, okay, how do we recover that respiratory system? How do we get our lung energy and our oxygenation back so that we can actually get our defensive energy back? And this takes a lot of energy. So we want to support this in a way that your body can do it faster. And I think the recovery, graphs that Manford had in his book on the flu is they looked at about 8 days for a full recovery to a normal level of oxygenation. And then when he applied his quick step protocols, which is what we do with LiveO2, they were basically back to those levels of oxygenation in about 2 hours. And when we look at it this way, it makes a lot of sense that, it's bad enough that you had to get sick. You hit a strong pathogen and your body had a little bit of a weakness, so it got sick. But the thing that you want to recover from really quickly is that oxygen deficiency that your body experienced for the last 4 or 5 days. And this is a way that you can bounce back really quickly. One of the worst things is when you get sick and you don't bounce back and the next strain of the pathogen comes around and you get sick again. And, these are the types of things that take weeks to recover from. And if you're in a more susceptible population, it might be the start of that injury to your respiratory system that you never actually recover from. And that's a critical scenario for some folks that are younger and older in age, that, have a little bit less resource to deal with an illness. The recovery part becomes real important so they can really defend against the next challenge and get back to healthy physiology where they have good lung function and they're clear and their warmth in their body comes back so they're not feeling ill for a longer period of time.
Okay, Mark, did you have something that you wanted to add there?
The process of, healing and, just the realization that all of these respiratory viruses, they're injuries to the heart and lungs. And if you can first aid, your heart and lungs and, get your breathing working again, then you just recover. And I think it's really terrible that the existing healthcare system doesn't realize this and doesn't do what it can. And so my personal feeling is that, having a LiveO2 and having the ability to do this for yourself at home, whenever it happens it's so empowering. And, like, for example, this graph, the point about the graph here is all of these poor people, what's happening is the flu's spreading because nobody knows what to do about it. And it's so simple as, giving first aid to your respiratory system. And if you do that, your immune system will work and there's no reason to get sick. And, as you move into the secondary, they monitor flu by deaths. And this year they're talking about so many deaths because if you let it get so weak that the second pathogen, pneumonia or whatever comes on, you just don't have the strength to fight it, then it can become life-threatening. And, what we're seeing here is it's really unnecessary. Just have the tools at home. When you start to get sick, get yourself oxygenated and stay oxygenated. And that's the best thing you can do to take care of yourself and your family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I really like the concept that Tom laid out about the East meeting the West, because I think a lot of times, here in the West, we turn to just traditional healthcare model. And in reality, if we use the tools that we already have, which is one of the things we really like to talk about here at LiveO2, and using oxygen to build healthy habits in your body instead of relying on outside sources, then that's really the best thing that you can do. So I know a lot of you listening are wondering, okay, this is great. How do I get started? What do I need to do? Well, that's what we're going to link up to, and that's the protocol that Mark has been talking about, and we're calling it Respiratory Recovery. So I will link up to it here in the sidebar. You can click on that to access it. I will also follow up with an email with a link to that for all of you listening. And if you have any questions about it, you can always reply to that email, or you guys can hop over to our new private Facebook group. So lots of you are already in it. If you're not, you can easily find it and request membership. It's just a group for LiveO2 users to kind of share their experience, share tips and tricks, and also to learn about events and upcoming news. So that's facebook.com/groups/LiveO2 for the people. And I will also link up to that here so you can just directly access it. So we want to be respectful of you guys' time. I think we've wrapped it up here. Guys, thanks for joining us today. Mark, Rob, and Tom, I appreciate it. And for all of you listening, we will look for your topic suggestions in the Facebook group for our next topic, and we will see you next time. Thanks for joining, guys.